Now, the first game, my friends, is the game O'Connor, I should say, against Kevin. And Kevin was playing with the black pieces, so we'll see it from his point of view. And let's begin. And Kevin, just to let you know, I for some reason had some difficulties loading the analyzed version into my program I'm using, so I sometimes have to switch back and forth, checking my analysis. So sometimes I might need to take some time just to check that I'm not forgetting anything that I want to mention, okay? Just so you know. All right, so we have this orthodox Queen's Gambit declined line, which is very solid. I don't know much about it. I do know that a6 is not one of the main moves, but you're saying so here yourself, and you just want to get your opponent into unfamiliar positions or lines. Now knight h5, bishop d3. Here, it's okay that you're waiting, but here I guess you could just take on f4 first and then play b6 next, not to allow him this option of going knight e5, what happened in the game, right? So it's usually a good idea to limit the options of your opponent if you can, right? By playing knight takes f4 first and then going b6, now your opponent doesn't have that option anymore, knight e5, because, well, it could take on e5, probably it could take on d4, it just doesn't work, okay? So, and you're also writing this here. So b6, there was no necessity to give him this additional option, knight e5. You saw it, but, and you evaluate it as fine for you, but why give him this option in the first place, right? Knight e5, knight takes, and bishop takes h7 is interesting here. I looked at this a little bit because first I thought you're playing for white pieces, but it seems it's not much for white either. Bishop takes, g6, and now your opponent makes an inaccuracy, allows you to get the bishop pair. That was the whole idea of the knight h5 maneuver, so that's all good. And here writing the pair of bishops does offset the weak black king position. However, I didn't trust the position was open enough for the two bishops and didn't want to expose my king any further with the e6, e5 break. I still have a hard time assessing this. All right, so that's correct. You don't necessarily want to go e5 because it would open up your king further. But the bishop pair can shine in the long run. And we'll see some things that you could have done here. I think, like you're saying, queen d6 is good. Centralizing a queen before playing bishop d7. Now rook fc1. Bishop d7 is also fine, developing knight a4. Now bishop takes a4, I don't like at all, because from that point forward, you're just fighting for a draw. It's a play for two results, but for you it's draw or loss, right? And that's not the kind of position you want to be in, and there was no necessity to be in this situation in the first place. So in this position of the knight a4, white is actually not even threatening anything right now. You could play a move like f5. And I think this move makes a lot of sense. You're stopping any kind of e4 from white for a long future. And there's this plan maybe to play h5, h4 and slowly try to open up the white king position. And white can't really do much. Okay, first of all, of course, queen takes b6 fails to bishop takes a4, knight takes b6. You just play rook b8 and pick up the knight. So that doesn't work. There's nothing there for white. So what else can white do? Well, probably double the rooks, but okay, now you can support the pawn, rook c1, and now what? You can go for this plan, play h5, h4, then white has to take on h4, and maybe later on you can advance further with the pawns. Of course, you always have to be careful, but it's also going to be interesting what white is going to do, because rook c7 looks nice, but you just push out the rook. It doesn't help white in any manner. So I would absolutely keep the bishop pair, because like I said, you're just fighting afterwards for draw with no chances really no chance for winning. I mean, this is just my personal approach. I wouldn't like to be in a situation, whereas here, of course, the position is rather equalish, but they're still all results, and I would prefer black definitely. Because I'm really having a hard time to come up with a plan for white, really. Whereas, like I said, you can try h4 and then just see what happens there. Take, bishop takes, and maybe use the h file in the long run. All right. So let's go back here. Bishop takes, queen takes, b5, queen c2, and now queen d7 is a mistake. I would say you're making it hard on yourself, definitely. You're allowing white to enter on c7 with tempo. You have to immediately react to the threat to your queen. I think a move that makes a lot of sense is to play king f7. You bring the king closer already to the center in case an endgame emerges. You're also protecting his pawn on g6 just in case. I mean, I know it wasn't really a threat besides a threat of making a draw for white, but it doesn't hurt to have the king on f7. It feels quite safe. And now if queen c7, you could just play a move like rook fd8, and if white now takes on d6, you just take back with the bishop. Or you could also just play a move like f5 here. I mean, either one. And what is white going to do to improve his position? I mean, it still feels a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest. After like rook c6, let's say, takes. Because white does have this active rook on the 7th rank, but this should be possible to hold this, certainly. Okay, so queen d7, but now this is coming with tempo, right? Okay, now rook fd8, rook c6, yeah, I'm wondering actually if in this other line after rook c6 here, if maybe it's possible to go queen d8. But now probably rook c1 nonetheless. Yeah, not that simple. Not that simple, unfortunately. Okay, back to the game. Queen c7, rook fd8, rook c6, now king f7. Rook c1, takes. And I think you're doing a good job here defending, and I think this all works out pretty well. How you're doing this here, forcing the endgame with the opposite colored bishops. Obviously, white has won a pawn, but you have taken the rooks off the board, and it is a dead draw here. So we'll look into this in a second. I'll just check my notes real quick if I've missed anything. Oh yeah, I did miss something I want to say. Okay, check this. Here in this position, king e8 is a slight inaccuracy. Once again, this move f5 makes a lot of sense. You're stopping for one e4 and for the other g4, and after king e8, this g4 move would have been unpleasant for you because white is fixing a weakness here on h7, and this might be a problem later on. So you need to look out for the white options pretty much, and making sure you can't fix any of your pawns as weaknesses. I mean, if you play f5 now, he could even go g5, and then it's obvious that this pawn is a weakness. So this is what I want to point out. Is there anything else that I forgot to point out? Let's see. All right, now we'll get to the end game right here. And you're asking, how should I play this, right? I don't know what the plan is to assure a draw here. Should I place my pawns on dark squares or light squares, lock position up, or trade everything, create a passed pawn to prevent any further white passed pawns? Okay, let's get to one question after another. Usually, and of course, there are always exceptions to these rules. Usually in opposite color bishop endgames, you want to place the pawns on the same color as your bishop, because that means the other bishop can't attack them and you can defend them with your bishop. That can sometimes have drawbacks because it allows the opponent's king to invade on the opposite color of your bishop, because those squares obviously cannot be covered by your bishop. But usually that's the strategy. Here though, you already have several pawns on the light squares, and that's fine, they're not weak, right? The base is e6 and you can easily defend that right now. And the other base is h7 and there's no way white can attack that. So I think the strategy of f5 would have been best. But first let me answer your other questions. Should I lock the position up or trade everything? Well, in this case, I think you can just lock it up, because white cannot make any progress on the queen side. Whenever, let's say, the king comes to c3, it's a little bit too many arrows right now, then you just play bishop a5 check, and there's no way for white to make any progress there. So what can white actually do? The only way white can do anything is attached to playing f3 and e4, something of these sorts, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense to play f5, and well, white can play around whatever he wants. You'll just stay like this. Whenever a king comes to c3, you play bishop a5, and if white plays f3, you play bishop c7, keep an eye on this pawn, king f2, and now you can just wait pretty much. I mean, you can play h5 even. And obviously the white king has to keep the pawn protected. f4 would just lock everything completely up. So bishop d3, king e7, and now e4 could be just answered by taking and maybe taking. I was thinking bishop b6, but then the pawn on g6 is still hanging, but maybe that's not a big issue. Okay. Okay, that's why actually in this position, instead of playing king e7, which I'm sure is also a draw, it's better to play g5, so that if e4, you could just take and play bishop b6 now, and winning the pawn on d4, and it's an immediate draw. Yeah, but even, I mean, also king e7 is also fine after e4. But even if you just go bishop b6 here, or take everything on e4, there's really not much I can do, if anything. So I think that was the simplest way to play this. Just go f5 and then just sit and wait. And now your last question. Should I create a passed pawn or prevent any further white passed pawn? That is a good question. You should definitely prevent white from creating further passed pawns, because your bishop can deal with one pawn, no problem. But with two pawns, it's going to be more difficult. And that's what we're going to see in the game. So it doesn't really, if you get a passed pawn, it doesn't help you that much in most cases. We'll see that in the game actually. So stop white, stop your opponent from creating more passed pawns. All right, now e5. So this is fine, but it is making maybe a test a little bit more difficult. Takes, king f1, king d6, king e2. You're saying g5 is important to play? I don't think so. Bishop a5 is completely fine. But here d4, I think this is actually a losing mistake. I think that this endgame now after d4 is lost, because white is getting another passed pawn. The pawn on e4 will be a passer after f4, which your opponent unfortunately didn't play. So I believe it is lost. Here, don't play d4. Like I said, okay, now, of course, you know that your own passed pawn doesn't mean that much. White can just stop it. So it's more important to stop your opponent from having a passed pawn. And here d takes e4. Now white cannot approach, bishop b6 check. So bishop b7, and here there would be even the option to go king c5. If now bishop takes e4, okay, just king d4, and obviously black is too active. I mean, the only plan white has, I guess, is to run over here, but now just bishop e7, or even waiting one more move until the king is on h4 and still bishop e7, not allowing the king to come in, and nothing white can do in this position. Or maybe I should do it smarter. Bishop e7 would allow a5, so just bishop a5, king h4, or here bishop e1. Okay, bishop a5, king h4, bishop d8. Okay, there are many ways, obviously. White can't do anything here. So king c5 is one way. Of course, one would need to check this move. This seems a little bit more critical. But here, king b4 is possible. If bishop c6, just bishop b6 check. And if king takes e4, picking up the pawn, bishop e1. And now the king can just come back. And it's a draw. That's not the only way to draw with king c5. I mean, this is a little bit, I guess, more forceful. Either getting the king to d4 or picking up this pawn on a4. It's also possible to play it differently, but this seemed to be the simplest way. Yeah, I'm sure bishop b6 should be also a draw. You keep an eye on this pawn. And now you see the difference, right? White didn't create a passed pawn here and shouldn't be able to. So this should result in a draw as well. So what's the problem with d4? Well, I know your opponent played g4, but if he goes f4, you're writing yourself g5, and now takes, king d3, bishop d8 should hold, assuming white can't his bishop to d3, but he can, right? He'll just go bishop c4. And now there was one accurate move white had to play. Let me see real quick. Oh yeah, so in this position after bishop b6, white should go g4, because otherwise black can go g4 himself, and in that moment, and then go after the g3 pawn, so white can go g4 himself, and then, well, black just waits and white brings the bishop to c2 and then plays king c4 and wins, right? You cannot stop both pawns. So that's the issue. And the same is true after other moves like bishop c7, same story. Same plan, bring the bishop back, and I think it's winning for white. I mean, okay, I don't know if there's some miraculous save, but I'd be surprised. In general, with these endgames, the further away the two passed pawns are from your opponent, the worse it is. Otherwise, you can still like get some fortress in, oftentimes, when both of them are on the same diagonal of the bishop. So in that case, let's say this pawn was over here, then you see how the bishop would control. Okay, it's too many arrows right now. Let's say the a4 pawn was on b5. Then the bishop would control both the e5 square as well as the b8 square. It might be a different story. But here you see the bishop cannot control both pawns. And also, of course, it is getting more complicated since there are more pawns on the board. Okay. All right. So your opponent played g4, king c5. But now, yeah, g5, you find the right idea here, just stopping this, putting the pawns on the dark squares, and this is simply a draw. Now a lot of moves were made. Yeah, I wasn't sure why you didn't go back to c5 here. That seemed to be simpler, but it doesn't make a difference. Okay, king takes d4 leads to the same line pretty much. King d6, okay. And you found this drawing idea here. Yeah, creating a wrong pawn for the opponent, very nice. And now it's a draw, dead draw, because black can just give the bishop for this pawn and will keep his king on h8, and white has the wrong bishop, cannot ever get this king out on h8, and it's a draw, even though white is up a pawn and the bishop. All right. So I think some important lessons here for you to take from this game. Definitely have a look at opposite colored bishop endgames. And I just read a really good book that I can recommend. Not on this particular endgame, but on endgames in general. It's called 100 Endgames You Must Know by Jesus de Avila. And it's a very light read. It's not that thick. It's just 100 endgame positions. And he covers all the basics. And it's really useful because if you have those fundamentals down, that will help you even if there are more pieces on the board. So he goes really from the basic positions starting, like for example a position like this one, where it says, okay, if you have the king in the right corner, so in front of the right pawn, then it's obviously a simple draw. If the king was over here, then obviously white would be winning because the king would run over, promote this pawn, and then it is the right bishop for this pawn, right? So that's a book I would recommend you to read. It will definitely help you with your endgames, and to everybody else watching out there, I recommend to everybody. It helped me a lot, even though of course I knew a lot of positions already, but still to refresh my memory and also to get these rules and rules of thumb again explained to me was just helpful, and I'll periodically review them because I think it's unnecessary to lose points just because you don't have this knowledge of basic endgames, pretty much of positions that arise again and again, or are likely to arise again and again in your own games. So other than that, I mean, that's certainly what I noticed the most with this, that you were struggling to hold a draw in this what shouldn't be difficult in this endgame. And other than that, your decision bishop takes a4 stuck out to me. That's the right word, not stuck out to me, because you're condemning yourself to defense for the rest of the game, and that's just, it's not necessary, right? I mean, I don't think it's fun for you, right? And you don't have to do that in that particular position. Believe in the power of the bishop pair. I feel like I repeat this in every stream, and even though it might seem in the particular position that the bishop pair is not that useful because position is closed, oftentimes it can go from a closed position to an open position. So keep that in mind, and you never know when the bishop pair will eventually shine. So let me check the chat if you had any questions. Oh, very nice. Great. Awesome. Kevin says he has the book in front of him already. Well, that's very good. Very good. Okay, great. All right. So that's what I would say about this game. The opening, let me see. The opening was fine. I think everything was fine. I mean, except for your decision with knight takes f4 to delay that, but okay, it's a minor thing. Yeah, and then in the end game, maybe paying a little bit more attention to your opponent's options, but okay, it wasn't really that much. Just this one move g4, where your opponent could claim more space, and you could have stopped it with f5. All right, thanks for sending it in. Thanks for the support, Kevin. I hope that was helpful. And let me know if you have any questions.